Our next speaker, you've already seen her on the main stage talking about how she has helped to build some badass brands. Now she's here to answer some of my questions and some of your questions. Please welcome Bozoma St. John. Love it. What should we do? A fist bump. You've got your microphone in your hand there. Brilliant to have you here, and great to see your energy on the main stage a little bit earlier. How does it feel for you?
Oh, great. I love being in Finland. This is fantastic.
Have you spent much time here?
No, I haven't. I just got here yesterday, and I leave tomorrow. But I will leave with a great impression because you guys made it amazing.
So Nordic Business Forum and the country have done some good branding.
Amazing branding.
All right. Let's talk a little bit about internal communications. We've talked a bit about building external brands, but obviously a lot of branding comes from within.
Yeah.
How do you make sure that employees become a brand's best ambassador?
Oh, yes. Okay. So here's the thing. Again, I've had some experiences that would help me to understand this, right? I gave the example on the main stage of working at Uber. And at the time when I got to the company, there was such friction, not just externally, but internally, that employees didn't want to wear their Uber shirt to the grocery store. When they would go to a dinner party or a cocktail party and somebody said, "Oh, where do you work?" They would lie. They wouldn't say they worked at Uber. Can you imagine? Yes, you can imagine, because at the time it was so bad. And so coming in as a chief brand officer, my job wasn't just to work on the external brand of the company, but the internal brand of the company, to make people feel proud of what the company stood for, what we did. Now, of course, that becomes a challenge if you can't manage the external brand, because I think those two things are so tightly knit. It's like, are your brand values communicated in a way that make people feel like, oh, this is a company that I can stand behind. I can say they're doing the right thing. If your company can't say that, your employees are certainly not going to say that. And sometimes I find that there are two ways to talk about the company values and vision, right? To the external audience, it has to become pointed and, commercial and fun and, just something that people can take away in bite-sized pieces. You have much more time with your employees to explain what the company vision is, to have really deep discussions about why you do the things that you do. I think it's extraordinarily important, this is about evolution of brand, is that in today's day and age, we have to, as leaders, be that much more communicative with our employees about why we make decisions we make, why we're doing the thing that we're doing. You might not think as a leader that you have to do that because it's like, oh, well, it's my job to make the decision and then they need to follow it. But no, not in today's time. You have to be able to explain why it is that you're doing something. Now, it doesn't mean that everybody needs to agree with you, but they need to at least be able to understand it and then explain it. Because what happens when they go outside and they're at a dinner party or they're at the grocery store and they're wearing the company name on their t-shirt, somebody is going to ask them a question and they need to be able to answer it well.
So what did you want people to be saying when people found out that they work for Uber?
Well, I wanted them to be proud of the technology that the company was creating. I wanted them to be proud of the fact that it was the first of its kind and that it was creating new ways for people to get around safely. And so for me, it was like really trying to not just externally get people to trust the company, but for employees to understand why we did the things that we did in order to build trust.
So you've just given us two very clear examples of why it's so important to invest in communication and marketing, both for the external public and for the internal employees to help grow the brand by what they communicate. But as we've seen in a tough global economy, it's very often communication and marketing teams that are first to have their budgets slashed. How has that affected you when you've been working for brands, and why do you think companies should prioritize these areas of the business?
Well, clearly I'm biased. I mean, I always find it so wild that it's like the marketing and communications parts that are cut first, because again, I cannot say it enough, which is that when your company is in trouble, it is your brand that people are going to depend on, nothing else. It's like the challenge is that in every business, there are competitors, right? So when you think that it's simply because your product works that is going to make a customer like you better, that is the wrong way to associate. Because honestly, what happens is that there are enough similarities between you and your competitor, because everything that we do in the world now has decreased in terms of the market share and the ways in which we communicate, that if there are not other reasons for them to love you, and again, I use the word love, not even like, not just respect, not just appreciate, but love you, then there's no way for them to stick with you when either the market gets really tough and they have to make a decision based on price, or you do something wrong and they have to forgive you. You know, like I was saying this earlier in another conversation, that, you know, the idea of brand marketing is actually an illogical part of the business, right? Because we talk about love. Has anyone here ever been in love? For the people who didn't say they've been in love, I'm sorry, okay? If you've ever been in love, you realize that it kind of is illogical. You fell in love with somebody for X number of reasons, right? They did this, they did that, they did that, they are this, they are that, they are that. And then the illogical kicked in, where now it's like, oh, everything that they do is so fantastic. Then have you ever fallen out of love with that person? Okay? What happens when you fall out of love? All of a sudden, you look back and you're like, oh, I hated that thing they did. You know, it wasn't even cute. I don't even know why I liked it then. This is what happens to your brand. It's like the point of marketing and communications is to make your customer and your audience love you for illogical reasons. That way, when you're doing the dumb things that they don't like, they will still love you enough to ride with your company.
Okay. Great persuasion skills there. So say all of the business leaders here are thinking, right, I'm gonna reinvest in my branding and communications team. We've got a bit more money now. We're coming back from the global economic issues going on. What qualities should recruiters look for in the marketeers and communications experts of the future?
The qualities for the executives who are going to be doing the job?
Either the execs or the new talent coming in. What do you need in your communications teams right now?
The number one attribute, and again, this is so funny because you think I would say education or something, but the number one attribute you need a good marketer or communication person is curiosity. You know, those executives have to be the most curious in the building about people, about the world. They have to, when you ask them what's going on in the world today, they better know. And if they don't, you should fire them. But any case, my point is that the idea that a person who is communicating your product or service doesn't know what is going on in the world, doesn't know what's going on with people, it means that the message they're trying to send will fail because they don't have context. So it's like anything else. If I don't know anything about you, I don't know where you came from, if you're married or not, if you have kids or not, if you're from Finland or not, and I'm trying to communicate something to you, and I miss the mark because I assume that you're married, you have kids, and you're from Finland.
All wrong.
Well, there you go. I would have failed immediately. And so the number one attribute of a great marketer is curiosity about people.
And asking the questions, as you just did.
Yes.
We've got some great questions coming in, by the way, from our audience, so I'm going to dive into some of those. This person says, what can we do when employees don't buy in the business that the company's running?
Well, why are they employed?
That's what I was thinking that as well. Maybe we should be persuading them to move on. But should you be persuading them to move on? Is that the answer?
Yes. Your employees should be your evangelists. You know, they should be the ones who are most sold by your product or service. If they're not, you are doing something wrong. And so for me, it's like if your employees don't like the thing that you're doing, they shouldn't have a job, first of all. And then secondly, if they are there and you find that all of them or a majority of them don't believe in the product or service, then you are doing something wrong. And so there should be a way that you communicate so that they become your biggest evangelists.
Yeah. Great stuff. One of the other questions we're getting is when and where will recordings of the HS Visio Live Studio be available? They'll be available soon, and they're available on YouTube. So if anyone's leaving early and missing some of the sessions, you can catch them all there. Question here from someone who's decided not to be anonymous. That's nice and rare, but cool. Hi to Mark. He says, did Uber fix behind branding the real issues? Can branding override bad business practices?
No. You can't put a Band-Aid on a bleeding wound. You know, you just can't. And so my job would have been impossible to do Or let me just put it this way. You can, but it only lasts temporarily, right? Before it's like, woof, everything gushes out. And so the only way to have sustainable, great brands is by fixing the problem. So the answer to the question is yes.
Okay.
But the challenge in the job was that I had to do it simultaneously. So it was like the issues with the company were happening, and I had to communicate that they were going to happen. So I had to convince people that don't worry, this problem is going to be solved while it was being solved, not afterwards.
Yeah, and get them to still believe in you
Correct.
along the way.
Yeah.
Interesting question here from Christine. She says, oh, sorry, that was a different one. My screen's just frozen. Let's move on to some more of my questions.
Okay.
Here it is. How many love affairs can one person have? Is it realistic to expect people to love your brand when there are so many brands in our lives?
Yes. Yes. How many love affairs? So many. I mean, look, we could just name like 10 categories. And if I went around and asked everybody who's watching here in person or who is watching us on the live stream, we would be able to name a brand in the category that you love better than everything else. If I said phone, you'd be able to decide. If I said shoes, you'd be able to say. If I said a brand of clothing, you would say. If I said airline company, you would say. If I said car, you would say. If I said grocery store, you would say. There are so many brands and so many industries, so many avenues that we make daily decisions about. And we fall in love and we stay in love if the company keeps us in love. And so my point is not that there are so many different places to be, but the fact that we as human beings and as consumers have the capacity to fall in love with so many different types of companies. The point of our job is to make sure you fall in love with ours.
Great stuff. Some other aspects of brands that companies increasingly know they need to communicate. So we focus on sustainability, we focus on diversity, we focus on social issues. But there is also a knowledge that a lot of companies that do that are doing it to prove a point rather than actually doing it behind the scenes.
Yeah.
What are your top tips on how to communicate those messages authentically?
Well, I mean, again, this is the point of the issue, which is that, there's only two ways to get it wrong. One is if you're doing the work and you don't say anything about it. It's as good as not doing the work, And then the other bad thing is to say you're doing it and then not doing it. Those are the only two bad ways. And so, again, for me, I think that companies in today's age, for sure, you have to be disciplined about what is the main mode of conversation that you want to have with your customer in telling them what you are doing. So you have to be disciplined in that. You have to choose something. You can't be everything. And so you have to choose something and then stick with it. But there is an opportunity for evolution. So you can say, okay, today it's sustainability, okay? And we work on sustainability. We build a foundation of sustainability so people trust us on sustainability. And then you evolve the conversation in a little bit to include something else or a particular area of sustainability that you think is going to be more impactful. That is the way that you do it. You don't just cut and say, okay, sustainability, done, we're finished. Now on to the next thing in a year.
So
that
incremental
is how you,
change.
Yes, you do incremental change over time and not all at once.
We could talk for hours, but I'm afraid we've got more guests waiting in the wings. Thanks so much for joining us, boss. Thank you.
Thank you. I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
All right.